Pam Bondi was mocked, dismissed, and dared to prove herself on stage. What happened next flipped the story completely, leaving everyone watching humbled. It all started during a podcast episode no one expected to go viral. The guest? Jackson Weller, an indie rock musician from Portland known for his sharp tongue and progressive takes. Halfway through a story about playing at a fundraiser, the host casually asked, "Ever run into anyone from politics backstage?" Jackson chuckled, took a sip of his drink, and leaned into the mic. Pam Bondi was at one of those events, he smirked. Nice lady, I guess, but come on. She looked at the grand piano like it was IKEA furniture. Laughter filled the room. I doubt she can tell middle C from a cup of coffee. The joke landed well with his usual crowd, young, left-leaning, and suspicious of anyone with a political past. Jackson was known for these offhand jabs. Most didn't take them too seriously. But this time, it stuck. Within hours, clips of the moment flooded social media, trimmed, looped, and turned into memes. Captions like "Jackson drags Pam Bondi with a musical burn," and "Pam, do you even know what a piano is?" spread like wildfire. Pam didn't respond. Not then. In Tampa, she was sitting at her kitchen counter when her phone buzzed. A message from her niece. A link to the clip, followed by a crying laugh emoji. Pam watched it once, then again. She didn't flinch, didn't roll her eyes. She just sighed, closed the video, and set her phone face down. Her tea had gone cold, but she didn't delete the clip. Jackson wasn't done either. A week later, during an interview with a Seattle-based magazine, he took another jab. "She's lawyer smart, sure," he said, "but I doubt she's got a creative bone in her body. You can't fake art. Either you feel it or you don't." This time the joke hit differently. It wasn't just lighthearted banter anymore, it was personal. Some fans laughed, others felt uneasy. A few older listeners started commenting, "Is this really necessary? Just play music, man." Jackson didn't notice or didn't care. He was focused on his upcoming Florida tour. He figured the noise would die down. What he didn't know was that Pam had just received a last-minute invite to a high-profile charity event in Sarasota, a music and arts fundraiser for kids, the same event Jackson was set to perform at. She hadn't planned on speaking. She wasn't even supposed to take the stage. She was attending as a quiet donor, someone who preferred to stay in the background. She hadn't played publicly in over 15 years. But something was shifting. Later that week, she walked into her guest room, pulled off the old sheet covering her upright piano, and ran her fingers over the keys, out of tune, stiff from time. She smiled to herself, then picked up her phone. "Hey, Dan," she said, calling her old music instructor from law school. "Still tuning pianos?" Meanwhile, Jackson kept doing press. During a radio appearance in Clearwater, he joked again. "Maybe she'll bring her sheet music," he laughed. "Who knows? Maybe she'll surprise us with chopsticks." What he didn't know was that Pam had been practicing. Every day. She had already picked her piece, and she had no intention of talking, just playing. The night of the event was fast approaching, and soon not everyone would be laughing. Pam Bondi's public image had always been tightly controlled. Sharp suits, firm statements, camera-ready smiles. For years, that's all people knew of her. Prosecutor, politician, Fox News contributor, measured, deliberate, focused. But behind that image was something rarely seen. A different rhythm entirely, before law school, before politics, before the headlines. There was music. Pam grew up in Dunedin, Florida. Her father was the town's fire chief. Her mother taught Sunday school and played piano at church. Every Thursday afternoon, Pam would walk 3 blocks from school to Mrs. Donatelli's house. An aging Baldwin upright piano sat in the living room, surrounded by the smell of lemon polish and old books. She was 8 when she first touched the keys, 10 when she fell in love with Chopin. Mrs. Donatelli was tough. She'd slap the edge of the piano bench with a ruler whenever Pam slouched or dropped a finger. "Feel the space," she used to say. "Don't just press notes, tell the truth." By 15, Pam could play sonatas from memory. At 16, she placed second at the Tampa Bay Youth Music Competition, losing first place after freezing mid-measure during a Debussy piece. That loss stung, but it wasn't the end of her story. And now, after all these years, Pam was about to step back into the spotlight. Only this time, she wouldn't be standing behind a podium, she'd be sitting at a piano, and Jackson Weller had no idea what was coming. She never forgot the silence in the room when she stood up and walked off stage without finishing. She didn't cry. She didn't make a scene. She just folded the program into a neat square and tucked it into her wallet, where it stayed for years. A quiet reminder of the moment she let the music slip away. But life had other plans. Her parents split, college came fast, and music, while still inside her, got quieter. Criminology, then law. She told herself she'd return to music later when things calmed down. They never did. Years passed, career took over. Long work days, courtrooms, press briefings, and campaign trails. The piano in her guest room gathered dust, buried beneath law books and framed photos. People stopped asking about her hobbies. Most assumed she didn't have any. Even those closest to her had no idea she'd once played. Only one person ever brought it up again. Grant Halberg, a deputy prosecutor a few years younger than her, had a quiet way about him. They'd spent late nights working on a brutal case. In 2007, drowning in legal briefs and bad takeout. One night, Grant noticed a sheet of music peeking out from her briefcase. "You play?" he asked. She froze for half a second. "Used to." "What piece?" She hesitated. Nocturne in C-sharp minor. His eyebrows lifted. "That's not beginner stuff." She just nodded and went back to eating. Nothing more was said. A few weeks later, on her birthday, she found a small envelope on her desk. Inside was a single music page, just the opening bars of that nocturne, along with a yellow sticky note. "Don't wait forever," it read. "He died 5 months later. Brain aneurysm, no warning." She never threw away the note. Years later, when her niece sent her the viral clip of Jackson Weller mocking her, she didn't just hear a joke. She felt the same tight breath she'd felt at 16, after walking off stage without finishing her piece. That sting, that quiet push. She wasn't angry. She wasn't embarrassed. She was remembering. By the time the Sarasota charity event approached, she had practiced every night for nearly 4 weeks. The first few days were frustrating. Her hands were stiff. The keys felt unfamiliar. But muscle memory returned quicker than expected. She kept her sessions private. No cameras, no recordings. Just her, the piano, and a promise she hadn't realized she'd made to herself all those years ago. The piece she chose wasn't random. It was the one she never finished playing, Debussy's Clair de Lune. As the event neared, Pam's name quietly appeared on the guest list, but only as a donor. No announcements, no public hints that anything unusual would happen. Jackson Weller didn't notice, or if he did, he didn't connect the dots. He was too focused on his own set list, on his friends flying in, on the press, the drinks, the applause. Maybe he'd even throw in another joke at Pam's expense. What he didn't realize was that Pam wasn't coming for attention. She was coming for the music, but the stage wouldn't belong to him forever. And when it didn't, everything would change in a way no one saw coming. The Ritz-Carlton ballroom shimmered under soft string lights, the odor kind that made every cocktail dress look like couture, and every glass of champagne feel like liquid gold. The theme was Art for the Next Generation, raising funds for local school music programs. Pam Bondi arrived just after 7:15 p.m., wearing a sleek black satin dress with simple heels. No entourage, no press alerts. She hadn't stepped onto a stage in years. She didn't plan to tonight either, not unless the moment called for it. Across the room, Jackson Weller was already in full performance mode. A brown suede jacket, an open-collared shirt, his guitar case leaning against a table. He was deep in conversation with 2 journalists and a Miami musician who had once opened for him. He didn't notice Pam at first. She stayed near the edges of the room sipping seltzer, exchanging quiet pleasantries with familiar faces from her time in office. No one brought up pianos. She didn't either. Then, somewhere between the third passing tray of mini crab cakes and the opening remarks, Jackson finally spotted her. He didn't hesitate. He approached like a man walking into an easy headline, his voice loud enough to draw the attention of those nearby. "Well, well," he said, lifting his glass. "The legend herself." Pam turned slowly, her expression unreadable. "Jackson," she said with a polite nod. He grinned. "Glad you made it. Didn't know art fundraisers were your thing." "They are," she replied. "Especially when kids benefit." He raised an eyebrow. "Right, music education and all that." He took a sip of his drink. "So, any closer to telling the difference between a Steinway and a side table?" A few people chuckled nervously. Pam just looked at him. "Do you always talk like this at charity events?" He shrugged. "Just keeping it light. Besides, you've got a sense of humor, right?" She paused. "Sometimes." That could have been the end of it. But Jackson, buoyed by wine and ego, wasn't finished. He gestured toward the grand piano near the stage. "How about it?" he said, his tone casual but baiting. "Want to prove me wrong? Play something. Anything you pick." The room wasn't silent, yet, but the energy shifted. Conversations dulled. A photographer hesitated mid-frame. Even the woman at the silent auction table paused, fingers hovering over her laptop. Pam glanced at the piano, then back at Jackson. "I don't play for people who want me to fail," she said softly. That stopped him for a second, just long enough for her to add, "But I will play for the kids." Then she walked past him toward the stage. No dramatic exit, no scene, just movement, steady and composed, the same way she handled a courtroom, controlled, collected, complete. Jackson stood frozen. He hadn't expected her to accept. He thought she'd laugh it off, throw a jab back. But now she was at the piano speaking quietly to the sound technician. The room hushed as people gathered, a slow ripple of awareness. A few phones came out, not in a frantic rush but quietly, as if everyone sensed they were about to witness something rare. Pam adjusted the bench, placed her hands in her lap, and exhaled. She didn't look at the crowd. She didn't look at Jackson. She looked down at the keys, closed her eyes, and waited. Jackson, still by the bar, shifted. A friend leaned in and whispered, "You might have messed up, man." He didn't respond. For the first time in years, he felt something unfamiliar, uncertainty, and the first note hadn't even been played yet. Pam's fingers hovered over the keys. The air felt different now, as if the room itself had braced for something. Then, soft, barely there. The first notes of Clair de Lune spilled from the Steinway like water finding its shape. At first, no one reacted. The sound was too smooth, too intentional to be casual. Some wondered if the audio tech had cued a track. But then they saw her hands moving, saw the way her body swayed ever so slightly with each phrase. This wasn't a party trick. This was practiced. This was patient. This was heartbreakingly real. Jackson stood near the back, arms folded, mouth slightly open. The melody was familiar, but he couldn't place it at first. Then he recognized the tone, melancholy, rising and falling with grace. And something else. Sorrow. No. Memory. He wasn't laughing now. Pam played effortlessly, her fingers gliding across the keys, eyes closed, not performing, reliving. No one whispered. They just listened. More phones came up, camera flashes flickering like tiny fireflies. But even those sounds felt muted, as if the room itself didn't want to break the spell. And Jackson, he was remembering too, a night 10 years ago. A small club in San Francisco, a crowd of 20. His hands slipping on his guitar strings because he was so damn nervous, his fingers fumbling, missing chords. He wanted to stop mid-song, walk off, escape. But in the back row, a woman had been swaying to the music anyway, smiling, like she could hear something no one else could. He hadn't. felt that exposed in years, not until now. Pam's piece slowed, holding on to a final aching note. Then, silence. She opened her eyes just a second too long. Softly, she closed the lid. No grand gesture. Just done. She stood, gave a faint nod to the technician and stepped off the stage. No bow, no flourish, just a woman who had something to say, and said it without using her voice. For 10 full seconds, no one moved. Then, applause. Not forced, not polite. It built from the center of the room, rising like something boiling over. A few people stood, then more, then nearly everyone. It wasn't about politics, it wasn't about revenge. It was about being proven wrong. Pam didn't smile. She didn't need to. She simply returned to her seat, lifted her glass of seltzer and took a quiet sip. Jackson remained at the back of the room, a hand resting against his chin. He hadn't moved, hadn't spoken. His friend leaned in once more, voice low. "You okay?" Jackson blinked. "I think I just got humbled." Later that evening, when it was his turn on stage, he stepped up with noticeably less swagger. Adjusting his guitar strap, he tapped the microphone and exhaled. "I'm changing the set list," he announced. The crowd chuckled, expecting his usual playful charm, but he didn't smile. "Before I play," he continued, "I need to say something." Silence settled over the room. "When I was younger, I thought I was good at sizing people up," he admitted. "I thought I knew who had talent, who had depth, who had heart." He paused. "Turns out I've been pretty arrogant." Then he glanced toward Pam. "And I owe someone an apology." The weight of his words stilled the room. That night, Jackson played one of his oldest songs, stripped down. No effects, no embellishments. Just chords, a voice rough with honesty, and something new: humility. When he finished, the applause rose, steady and sincere. Pam didn't clap. She simply listened. And for once that was enough. But the night wasn't over. By morning, the world outside that ballroom had already caught wind of what had happened inside it. Videos of Pam at the piano flooded social media. One clip, shaky, filmed from behind a table littered with wine glasses, had already passed 1 million views. The caption read, "Pam Bondi just silenced a room with Debussy." Reactions poured in. "Didn't have Pam Bondi playing Clair de Lune on my 2025 bingo card, but here we are. Say what you want about her politics, that was raw, real, beautiful." Others were skeptical. "No way she just pulled that out of nowhere. PR stunt." "What's next? DeSantis breakdancing." But skepticism was drowned out by something deeper: curiosity, fascination, disbelief that someone so reduced to a caricature by the media could possess such quiet grace. And Jackson? He hadn't posted anything. No tweets, no sarcastic remarks. Instead, he sat in his Sarasota hotel room, his guitar across, his lap unable to play a single note. No lyrics came, no melodies, just a feeling he couldn't quite name. He kept replaying the moment, the weight of each note, the hush that had fallen over the room. It wasn't just that Pam had been good. She had been expressive in a way he hadn't seen in years. And she had done it without needing a single person in that room on her side. A memory surfaced. His old music teacher back in LA telling him, "Real musicians don't play to be understood. They play because they understand." Something no one else can put into words. For the first time in years, that actually made sense. Pam, meanwhile, remained silent. She returned home the next day, greeted her dog, watered her plants, and slipped seamlessly back into routine. She declined a request from Good Morning America, ignored a podcast offer from NPR, and led a flattering inquiry from a major music publication, wanting to feature her in a story titled "The Secret Virtuoso," go unanswered. She had already said what she needed to say. And she had said it in music. But she did reply to one email. It was from a 16-year-old girl in Arizona who had seen the video online. "I'm not into politics," the girl wrote, "but I've been too scared to sign up for piano class because I'm not very good. Yet after watching you, I think I'll try anyway." Pam stared at the message for a long time before typing back 2 lines. Thank you. And remember, the key isn't to be perfect, just be honest. That night, Jackson finally did post something, no video, no statement. Just a simple photo of a blank notebook and his guitar resting beside it. The caption read, "Starting over." He lost a few followers who called him soft, gained a few more who thanked him for showing humility. But the biggest shift wasn't online. It was in him. A few weeks later, he played a small theater in Pensacola. Nothing grand, no band. Just a stool, his guitar, and a quiet room. Midway through the set, he paused. "I learned something recently," he told the audience. "Sometimes we get so busy tearing down people we disagree with, we forget they're whole human beings. And sometimes they've got more to say than we ever gave them credit for." Then he did something no one expected. He turned to the venue's old upright piano, cracked his knuckles, and hesitantly began to play Claire de Lune. Badly. Really, badly. He stopped after a few bars and grinned. Okay, I'm no Pam." Laughter rippled through the crowd, warm and real, and in that moment something shifted, not just between two people, but between noise and meaning, between mockery and grace. By week's end, the clip had reached national outlets. It was picked up by CBS News, by Rolling Stone. And for the first time in a long time, Jackson didn't mind being quiet. Even The Tonight Show made a brief mention of it, not because Pam Bondi was trending as a politician, but because someone unexpected had just shattered the public's assumptions without saying a single word. The algorithms ate it up. So did the people. It wasn't just about music. It was about being loudly wrong and then being quietly, gracefully corrected. One of the most shared comments under the video came from a middle-aged man in Iowa. "I've disagreed with her on almost everything. But that was stunning. I feel small, forever thinking she was just a headline." Another from a 22-year-old in Los Angeles. It wasn't about right or left in that moment. It was about seeing someone fully for the first time. That was what stuck. The realization that we all reduce people, especially public figures, to whatever fits our beliefs. A soundbite, a party line, a tweet. But when Pam sat down at that piano, she reminded everyone that real people don't fit into tweets. Even Jackson's fanbase, who had laughed along with his piano jokes, found themselves rethinking the moment. One of his longtime listeners wrote, "Watch Jackson Challenger thought it'd be funny. But what she did? That wasn't just piano. That was years of something she carried waiting to be released. We don't know half of what people are made of." Pam's name started trending in a different way. Not as a politician, as a person, a woman who had been underestimated, mocked, and then calmly reminded the world of her depth, without ever clapping back. She never made a statement, never addressed the moment publicly. Her silence spoke louder than any press release. Jackson, for his part, kept things low-key. No official statement, no interviews. But later that week, he posted a photo of an old upright piano in a small studio. Caption: "Lessons resume Monday." He'd enrolled in private lessons in Gainesville. Said he was tired of pretending he knew it all. Some called it PR cleanup. Others saw it for what it was: growth. What no one could deny was that something had shifted, not just in Jackson, not just in Pam, but in how people talked about them. For a few days, the online world stopped shouting and started listening. Clips from the Sarasota event kept resurfacing. Someone uploaded the full 8-minute video of Pam's performance. In it, you could see every detail: the way she took a breath before beginning, the stillness in her hands between movements, the crowd's subtle transformation from amused to moved. One YouTube comment summed it up best. "This wasn't a gotcha moment. It was a moment of grace in a world full of noise." And that's why it resonated, because it wasn't about politics. It wasn't even about talent. It was about how wrong we can be when we assume people are only what we've heard about them. Pam didn't trend for yelling. She didn't trend for tearing anyone down. She trended because she showed up, stayed calm, and did the one thing nobody expected. She spoke through beauty, and real beauty doesn't argue. It doesn't defend itself. It just is. Back in Tampa, Pam's piano had been tuned, warmer, cleaner. She played in the evenings again, not for anyone else, just for herself. Sometimes just a scale, sometimes the same 3 bars over and over. No applause, no audience required, because it had never been about proving anything. But in that moment, she had reminded everyone watching of a truth they'd forgotten, that people are always more than the sum of their headlines. And stories like this, they only last if we carry them forward. It would have been easy to write it off as a fluke, some weird viral moment that came and went like all the others. But this one stuck, not just because Pam played beautifully, but because the moment felt honest, and honesty is rare, especially when it shows up unannounced. For a while, it sparked a real conversation online, about judgment, about ego, about how easy it is to dismiss someone without ever knowing who they really are. Everyone had their version of the story, political, musical, emotional, but the takeaway was the same. We assume too much. We listen too little, and we forget that everyone is carrying something they don't talk about. Pam's years at the piano weren't about showing off. They were about process, escape, peace. The fact that she never once brought it up, even when she was mocked on national platforms, wasn't modesty. It was restraint, self-respect, knowing who you are so deeply that you don't need to prove it every time someone throws a stone. There's strength in that. And on the flip side, Jackson's journey was just as real. He could have doubled down, posted something snarky, kept the joke going. A lot of people in his position would have, but he didn't. He listened, he watched, and when it became clear he'd misjudged someone, he let himself feel that, not publicly, not perfectly, but clearly. That kind of shift doesn't get millions of views. It doesn't make headlines, but it matters, because that's how we change. Quietly, slowly, one layer at a time. Weeks later, Pam got a letter, not an email, a real letter, handwritten in blocky cursive. It was from a middle school music teacher in rural Tennessee. I showed the video to my class. They were stunned, not just by the music, but by what it meant. I asked them afterward what they took from it. One kid said she didn't yell, she just played. That's going to stick with them. Honestly, it stuck with me too. Pam folded the letter neatly and placed it inside a drawer near her piano. She never replied. She didn't need to. Because that moment in Sarasota, it was never about fame or redemption. It wasn't a political stunt. It wasn't even about proving someone wrong. It was about showing what it looks like when someone knows exactly who they are and doesn't let noise, mockery, or public opinion shake that foundation. There's a lesson in that. For all of us, we live in a time where calling people out has become a sport, where assumptions go viral faster than facts, and where it's easier to shout into a void than to pause and wonder what someone's life might actually look like off camera. But that night, it reminded people of something we're starving for: depth, grace. Surprise, humanity. You don't have to like someone to recognize their talent. You don't have to agree with someone to acknowledge their worth, and you don't have to clap back when you can simply let your actions speak louder than your critics. Pam never asked for applause. She just played. And maybe that's the real lesson here. Don't speak unless it adds value. Don't fight unless it matters. And never assume you know someone just because you've seen their name on TV. Because one day, you might find yourself in a room thinking you're the one in control, only to watch someone you underestimated sit down at the piano and change the temperature of the entire world around you, without raising their voice, without asking for permission, just by being exactly who they are. If this story moved you, take a second to reflect on someone you've written off too quickly. Maybe it's time to see them again with different eyes. And if you're still holding back something you love, afraid the world won't understand it, maybe it's time to share it anyway. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story with someone who needs it. Real moments like these deserve to be remembered.